When a German Shepherd protects instead of attacks, enemies become family. A wealthy businessman, a stubborn farmer, and an unexpected connection that changes everything. Subscribe now and tell us where you're watching from. The first light of dawn painted the rolling hills of Oakwood Valley, Pennsylvania, in hues of amber and gold. Dew glistened on the fields of corn and wheat that had been cultivated by generations of the Sullivan family. James Sullivan, a man of 62 with deep-set blue eyes and skin weathered by decades under the sun, stood on his porch sipping coffee from a chipped mug that had belonged to his father. His calloused hands, monuments to a lifetime of hard work, trembled slightly, betraying the arthritis that had begun to claim his joints. The peaceful morning shattered as 3 black SUVs and 2 bulldozers roared up the dirt road leading to the farmhouse. Dust billowed behind them like angry spirits. James set his coffee down, his face hardening into a mask of determination. "Grandpa, what's happening?" asked his 16-year-old grandson, Michael, emerging from the house in worn jeans and a faded t-shirt. "Stay inside with your brother," James replied, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "And call your mother." The vehicles screeched to a halt. From the lead SUV stepped Alexander Rhodes, CEO of AgriCorp International, dressed in an immaculate charcoal suit that cost more than what James earned in 3 months. At 65, Rhodes possessed the sharp features and commanding presence of a man accustomed to getting his way. Silver hair perfectly styled, he surveyed the farm with cold gray eyes. "Sullivan," Rhodes called out, flanked by 2 security guards and a nervous-looking man clutching a leather portfolio. "This charade ends today. My company has rights to this land, and you're trespassing." James descended the porch steps, his back straight despite years of bending over crops. "This is Sullivan land. Has been for 4 generations. I've got the deeds to prove it." "Your deeds are worthless," Rhodes sneered, nodding to the man with the portfolio. "My lawyers have found that your great-grandfather never properly registered the eastern parcel. That makes it open for development, and AgriCorp has filed the necessary paperwork." From behind the farmhouse came a flash of movement. Ranger, James's loyal German Shepherd. 7 years old with intelligent eyes and a coat of black and tan, he raced toward the confrontation, hackles raised. "Call off your dog, Sullivan," demanded Rhodes, stepping back. "Ranger, stay," commanded James. The dog halted but remained vigilant, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "You have 1 hour to gather your essentials," Rhodes continued, checking his platinum watch. "After that, we start clearing this land for proper, efficient farming." Sarah Sullivan, James's daughter, pulled up in her battered Honda, still wearing her hospital scrubs from the night shift. At 43, she carried the weight of widowhood and single-parenthood in the slight slump of her shoulders, but her green eyes flashed with the Sullivan fire. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, marching toward Rhodes. "You can't just show up and claim our home." "Ma'am, I suggest you help your father pack instead of wasting time," Rhodes replied dismissively. Meanwhile, Ranger had slipped away, trotting purposefully toward a thicket of bushes at the edge of the property. His behavior caught Rhodes's attention, who frowned. "What's that dog doing?" The answer came in the form of a small whimper. Ranger gently nudged something in the bushes, and to everyone's shock, a child emerged. A little girl, no more than 10, with tangled blonde hair and a tear-stained face. Her expensive clothes were dirty and torn. "Lily." Rhodes's composure crumbled instantly, his face draining of color. "Lily." The girl looked up, her eyes widening. "Grandpa." Rhodes rushed forward, dropping to his knees regardless of his costly suit. What are you doing here?" "I got lost," she whispered, clinging to Ranger's fur. "I was exploring yesterday and couldn't find my way back. The dog found me. He stayed with me all night. He kept me warm." James and Sarah exchanged glances as Rhodes gathered his granddaughter in his arms, his imperious demeanor stripped away, revealing just a frightened grandfather. "She was on my land," James said quietly. "Ranger's been missing since yesterday afternoon. Now I know why." Rhodes looked up at the farmer, then at the loyal dog who had protected his most precious treasure. In that moment, something fundamental shifted in the atmosphere between the 2 men. Alexander Rhodes stared at his granddaughter in disbelief, his hands trembling as he checked her for injuries. The little girl's blonde hair was tangled with leaves, her designer clothes caked with mud, but she appeared unharmed. "I was so scared," Grandpa, Lily whispered, her voice small. But Ranger stayed with me. He kept barking when I tried to go deeper into the woods. Then he lay next to me all night. Rhodes looked up at the German shepherd who stood protectively nearby, then at James Sullivan's weathered face. The bulldozers idled ominously in the background, a stark reminder of what had been about to happen. "Mr. Sullivan," Rhodes said, his authoritative tone noticeably softened. I need to thank you and your dog." James crossed his arms. "It's Ranger you should thank. Animals have better instincts than some people, it seems." Sarah stepped forward, her nurse's training taking over. She should be checked for hypothermia and dehydration. Those woods get cold at night. She knelt beside Lily. "Hi there, I'm Sarah. I'm a nurse. Would you like some hot chocolate while I make sure you're okay?" Lily nodded shyly, her eyes darting between the adults. Inside the farmhouse kitchen, with its worn linoleum floor and faded curtains, the tension remained thick enough to cut with a knife. The Sullivan home was modest but clean, filled with family photos and handmade quilts, a stark contrast to Rhodes' minimalist penthouse in Philadelphia. "Where was her caretaker?" Sarah asked as she wrapped a blanket around Lily's shoulders and placed a steaming mug in front of her. Rhodes' jaw tightened. "Claudia, her nanny, thought she was playing in the guest house. Apparently, she didn't check on her for hours." His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Former nanny now. You fired her?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "The moment I learned Lily was missing." James observed the exchange silently, noting how Rhodes' hand trembled slightly as he reached for his phone. Behind the businessman's confident exterior, there was genuine fear and love for his granddaughter. "Your men are still outside with those bulldozers," James said pointedly. Rhodes looked up from his phone, a flash of shame crossing his features. He stepped outside briefly, and through the window, they could see him giving curt orders. Within minutes, the vehicles began to depart. When he returned, Rhodes seemed different, less the corporate shark and more a grandfather who'd nearly lost something irreplaceable. "Mr. Sullivan, I've been informed that there may be discrepancies in our legal assessment of your property." James snorted. "No discrepancies. This land has been Sullivan land since my great-grandfather cleared it with his own 2 hands in 1902. I've got the original deed in my safe." "I'd like to see those documents," Rhodes said, not as a demand, but as a request. While James went to retrieve the papers, Sarah checked Lily's temperature and pulse. "You've got good hands," Rhodes observed. "Where do you work?" "Oakwood Memorial. Emergency department," Sarah replied, her tone professional but cool. "Long hours. Single mom, 2 teenage boys, and a farm to help run. What do you think?" Rhodes nodded, contemplative. For the first time, he was seeing beyond his own ambitions to the lives his business decisions affected. James returned with a leather folder containing yellowed documents. These papers traced this land back 4 generations. Every acre accounted for, every transfer legal. Rhodes examined them carefully, his expression unreadable. "These appear to be in order. My legal team will need to review them, but—" He paused, looking around the kitchen at the simple life he'd been about to bulldoze. "I think there's been a mistake on our part." "You think?" James said sarcastically. Rhodes reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook. "I want to compensate you for—" "Put that away," James interrupted, his pride flaring. "We don't need your money." "Grandpa," Sarah cautioned, thinking of the mortgage they were struggling to pay and the boys' college funds that remained nearly empty. Rhodes observed the exchange, noting the stubborn set of James' jaw, a trait he recognized in himself. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "we could discuss a different arrangement. Your farm has excellent soil composition, but your yield could be improved with some modern techniques. AgriCorp has resources that could help." James narrowed his eyes. "You want to buy us out slowly instead of all at once?" "No," Rhodes replied, surprising himself with his sincerity. "I want to help you keep your land and make it thrive." Lily, who had been quietly petting Ranger under the table, looked up. "Can I come visit Ranger sometimes, Grandpa? Please." The simple question hung in the air, bridging worlds that had seemed impossibly far apart just hours before. Rhodes looked at his granddaughter, then at the Sullivan family, and made a decision that would alter the course of many lives. "Yes," he said softly, "if Mr. Sullivan allows it." James studied the businessman carefully, searching for deception. Finding none, he gave a single, measured nod. "Ranger would like that," he said gruffly. He seems to have taken a shine to her. As morning light streamed through the kitchen windows, illuminating dust motes and the steam from Lily's hot chocolate, the first tentative thread of connection formed between two families from vastly different worlds, all because of one dog's protective instinct on a cold autumn night. The days following the unexpected encounter brought noticeable changes to both families. Alexander Rhodes had postponed his return to Philadelphia, choosing instead to stay at his rarely used country estate just 15 miles from the Sullivan farm. Each morning, he woke to views of the rolling Pennsylvania countryside that he'd previously ignored in favor of spreadsheets and acquisition reports. James Sullivan spent those same mornings as he always had, rising before dawn, checking the fields, and muttering about the weather. But now there was a new routine, watching Ranger's ears perk up around 10 o'clock when a sleek black car would pull into the driveway bringing Lily for her promised visits. "You're spoiling that dog," James grumbled to Sarah as they watched Lily throwing a tennis ball for an enthusiastic Ranger. "He's supposed to be a working farm dog, not some pampered pet." Sarah smiled knowingly. Ranger knows his job, and having Lily around seems to be good for Michael and Jason too. Indeed, James's teenage grandsons had initially been suspicious of the rich girl, but her genuine enthusiasm for farm life and complete lack of pretension had won them over. Today, 17-year-old Jason was showing her how to collect eggs from the henhouse while Michael repaired a fence nearby. "She's lonely," Sarah observed softly. "A big empty house with only staff for company. No wonder she wandered off exploring." James harumphed, but said nothing. He understood loneliness all too well since losing his wife Martha 5 years ago. Later that afternoon, the peaceful scene was interrupted by the arrival of Rhodes himself. Unlike his previous visit, he came alone and dressed more casually in khakis and a button-down shirt, though his shoes, Italian leather loafers, were hopelessly impractical for a farm. "Mr. Sullivan," Rhodes called, approaching the barn where James was repairing an ancient tractor. "I wanted to check on Lily, but also to discuss something with you." James wiped his greasy hands on a rag. "She's fine. Learning about chickens." Rhodes nodded, clearly uncomfortable with the setting but pressing on. "I've had my team review those deed documents thoroughly. They're ironclad. This land is unquestionably yours." "Told you that already," James replied, turning back to the tractor. "Yes, well," Rhodes cleared his throat. "I'd like to make amends for the misunderstanding. AgriCorp has agricultural specialists who could help optimize your crop rotation, implement soil conservation. I don't need corporate farmers telling me how to work land my family has tended for generations." James interrupted, his pride flaring. Rhodes's jaw tightened. "Mr. Sullivan, your stubborn pride is admirable but misplaced. Your southern field has signs of soil depletion. Your irrigation system is decades out of date. With minimal changes, you could increase your yield by 30%. Their conversation might have escalated into an argument had Sarah not approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "Dad, Mr. Rhodes, coffee's ready if you'd like some." The farmhouse kitchen became neutral territory, where Rhodes explained his proposals more thoroughly, while Sarah listened attentively. "What's the catch?" she finally asked. "AgriCorp doesn't offer consulting services out of charity." Rhodes looked slightly offended. "There's no catch, Miss Sullivan. My company has resources that could benefit your farm. Consider it." He paused, searching for words. "Reparation for our misunderstanding. And it has nothing to do with wanting to keep Lily happy by staying on our good side." Sarah challenged, her green eyes sharp. Rhodes had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "That's not the only reason." James, who had been silently nursing his coffee, finally spoke. "Tell me something, Rhodes. Why'd you really come back to this area? Man like you could run his empire from anywhere." The question caught Rhodes off guard. He stared into his coffee cup before answering. "I grew up 30 miles from here, in Coal Creek." This revelation surprised both Sullivans. Coal Creek was known for its shuttered mines and generational poverty, a stark contrast to Rhodes's current lifestyle. "My father worked the mines until black lung took him," Rhodes continued, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. "I swore I'd never be trapped like he was. I left at 18 and never looked back." He met James's gaze. "Until recently. And now you're what? Reconnecting with your roots?" Sarah asked skeptically. "I'm trying to do something right," Rhodes admitted. "After my wife died, I buried myself in work. Lily was raised by nannies while I built AgriCorp into what it is today. When she went missing, his voice faltered. I realized some things matter more than expansion plans. The kitchen fell silent except for the distant laughter of Lily and the boys outside with Ranger. It was a moment of unexpected vulnerability from a man who had spent decades building walls around himself. Your irrigation system is garbage, James finally conceded gruffly. And the South Field hasn't been right since the drought 3 years back. It wasn't acceptance, not quite yet, but it was an opening, a crack in the stubborn farmer's defenses. Rhodes recognized it for what it was and didn't push further. My specialist could look at it tomorrow, if that works for you. Before James could respond, the back door burst open and Lily ran in, her cheeks flushed with excitement, followed by a muddy Ranger and the Sullivan boys. Grandpa, I collected 12 eggs all by myself, and Jason says I can help milk the goats tomorrow. Rhodes's expression softened as he looked at his granddaughter, happier than he'd seen her in years. When his gaze met James's across the table, an unspoken understanding passed between them. They were still men from different worlds, but they now shared something unexpected, a bridge between those worlds in the form of a little girl and a loyal German shepherd. Sarah Sullivan's night shifts at Oakwood Memorial Hospital had always been grueling, but her mind usually stayed focused on her patients. Tonight, however, her thoughts kept drifting to the unlikely developments at the farm. She rubbed her tired eyes under the harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency department, trying to concentrate on her charts. Sullivan, we've got an incoming, called Dr. Ramirez, her supervisor. Possible cardiac event. Ambulance ETA 3 minutes. Sarah snapped to attention, preparing a trauma bay with practiced efficiency. When the ambulance doors burst open, she froze momentarily at the sight of Alexander Rhodes strapped to the gurney, his face ashen. Male, 65, collapsed during a business meeting, the paramedic reported. History of hypertension. BP 160/95, pulse irregular. Mr. Rhodes? Sarah approached, professionalism overriding her surprise. Rhodes's eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to recognition. Miss Sullivan, he managed weakly. Quite the coincidence. I need an EKG and cardiac panel, stat. Sarah ordered a younger nurse while she placed the stethoscope against Rhodes's chest. Mr. Rhodes, are you taking any medications? Lisinopril, he mumbled. In my jacket. The next hours passed in a blur of tests and monitoring. By dawn, Rhodes had been stabilized, not a heart attack, but a severe anxiety episode compounded by exhaustion and untreated stress. Sarah found him sitting up in his hospital bed, looking unusually vulnerable in the standard issue gown, his phone clutched in his hand. Your blood pressure is still elevated, she said, checking his vitals. When was the last time you saw a cardiologist? Rhodes avoided her gaze. I've been busy. Too busy for your health, Sarah challenged, her nurse's directness cutting through his corporate armor. Your granddaughter needs you alive, Mr. Rhodes. Something in her tone made him look up. You don't mince words, do you? Can't afford to, she replied, adjusting his fore. In my experience, rich or poor, human bodies all break down the same way when neglected. Rhodes studied her, the dark circles under her eyes, the calluses on her hands, the determination in her stance. How long have you been on shift? 14 hours. Almost done. And then home to the farm and your boys. That's life, she said simply. We do what needs doing. Rhodes fell silent, contemplating how different their lives were, yet finding unexpected respect for this woman's resilience. Your father, is he always so stubborn about accepting help? Sarah's lips twitched into a small smile. Sullivan trait. Dad thinks accepting help means admitting failure. I understand that better than you might think, Rhodes admitted. I built AgriCorp from nothing. Asking for advice wasn't an option. Showing weakness invited predators. Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Ramirez, who insisted Rhodes remain hospitalized for observation. When Sarah's shift ended, she hesitated by his door. I'll tell Lily you're okay, she offered. She's coming to see Ranger this morning. Rhodes nodded gratefully. Thank you, Miss Sullivan. Sarah, she corrected. If we're going to keep running into each other, you might as well use my first name. At the Sullivan farm, news of Rhodes's hospitalization created unexpected concern. James tried to hide it beneath gruff comments about city folks not knowing how to take care of themselves, but he instructed the boys to handle Lily's visit with extra care. Don't mention her grandfather being in the hospital unless she brings it up, he warned them. When Sarah arrived home, bone-tired but unable to sleep, she found Lily playing fetch with Ranger while Michael and Jason repaired a section of fence nearby. The girl's face lit up when she saw Sarah. Is Grandpa really okay? His assistant called and said he had to go to the hospital. Sarah knelt to Lily's level. He's going to be fine. He's just very tired and his body needed rest. I took care of him myself. Promise. Lily's blue eyes, so like her grandfather's, filled with worry. Promise, Sarah assured her. He needs to take better care of himself, but he'll be back on his feet soon. From the porch, James watched the interaction, noting how naturally Sarah comforted the child. His daughter had always had a gift for healing, not just bodies, but spirits too. It was a quality her mother had possessed, one that James had always admired but never quite understood. Later, as Sarah prepared lunch for everyone, James joined her in the kitchen. Rhodes's fancy specialists are coming tomorrow to look at the irrigation system, he said, trying to sound disinterested. That's good, Sarah replied, slicing tomatoes from their garden. Man works himself into the hospital while preaching to others about modern farming techniques, James snorted. Seems like he needs to tend to his own fields first. Sarah regarded her father knowingly. You're worried about him. I'm worried about his granddaughter, James corrected. Child's already lost her parents and her grandmother. Doesn't need to lose him too. Sarah didn't push the point, but she understood what her father couldn't express. In Rhodes's vulnerability, James had recognized a reflection of his own mortality and responsibility. Two proud men, each carrying the weight of their family legacies in different ways. Outside, Lily laughed as Ranger performed an impromptu trick, rolling over in the grass. The simple joy of the moment contrasted sharply with the complex adult concerns swirling around her. Yet somehow, in that contrast lay the beginnings of unexpected healing, not just for Rhodes in his hospital bed, but for everyone whose lives had unexpectedly intertwined on that fateful morning. 3 weeks after Rhodes's health scare, the Sullivan farm buzzed with unusual activity. AgriCorp specialists in khaki uniforms examined soil samples, drew up diagrams, and installed monitoring equipment throughout the property. James trailed behind them, his expression a mixture of fascination and suspicion, questioning every recommendation and challenging every finding. Your nitrogen levels are critically low in this sector, explained Dr. Elena Vasquez, AgriCorp's head agricultural scientist, pointing to a detailed soil map spread across the kitchen table. It's why your corn yield has been decreasing over the past 3 seasons. My father and grandfather never needed soil chemistry lessons to grow corn, James argued, crossing his arms. Your ancestors weren't dealing with the results of decades of monoculture farming in the region, Dr. Vasquez countered respectfully. Modern problems require modern solutions, Mr. Sullivan. Sarah, who had taken a rare day off to be present for these discussions, placed a hand on her father's arm. Dad, at least hear them out. We've been struggling with that field for years. James sighed heavily, the weight of generational responsibility evident in the slump of his shoulders. At 62, his 6-foot frame had begun to bend slightly, and silver dominated his once auburn hair. The deep lines around his blue eyes spoke of years squinting against the sun, assessing weather patterns, and worrying about harvests. Fine, he conceded. What do you propose? As the specialists outlined their recommendations, Alexander Rhodes stood at the edge of the eastern field, gazing across the landscape. His hospitalization had forced him to slow down, following doctor's orders and Sarah's stern nursing directives to reduce stress and delegate more responsibilities. Today, he wore boots better suited to farmland, though his Oxford shirt still marked him as an outsider. How's it going with the old man? Rhodes asked as Michael Sullivan approached, carrying fencing tools. Michael, 16 and already showing the height and strong build of the Sullivan men, shrugged. Grandpa's listening, but he's not happy about it. Says we've been farming this land since before soil chemistry was invented. Rhodes smiled wryly. Your grandfather reminds me of my father in some ways. Different lives, but the same pride in doing things their own way. Mom says Grandpa's afraid. Michael ventured, surprising Rhodes with his insight. Not of change exactly, but of admitting that what his father taught him might not be enough anymore. Like he'd be betraying him somehow. Rhodes studied the young man with newfound respect. That's quite perceptive. I hear things, Michael said simply. He hesitated, then added, "Lily's at the house with Jason and Ranger. She's been teaching Ranger new tricks." Rhodes nodded, grateful for the subtle reminder that his granddaughter was nearby and happy. Since his health scare, he'd been making a conscious effort to be more present in Lily's life, even arranging to work remotely several days a week to remain in Pennsylvania. Inside the farmhouse, tensions flared as James confronted the reality of his farm's challenges. $20,000 for a new irrigation system, he exclaimed. That's highway robbery. Dad, Sarah interjected, her patience wearing thin. The current system wastes 40% of our water and costs us more in the long run. You know this. We've always made do with what we have, James insisted. Dr. Vasquez exchanged glances with her team, clearly accustomed to resistant farmers. Mr. Sullivan, with modernized irrigation and soil management, you could increase your yield enough to recoup the investment within 2 growing seasons. And where am I supposed to find $20,000? Under a rock, James demanded. The kitchen door opened as Rhodes entered with Michael. The room fell silent as the businessman assessed the situation. Perhaps AgriCorp could provide the irrigation system as a pilot program, Rhodes suggested smoothly, in exchange for documenting the improvements as a case study. James's eyes narrowed. I don't want to be anyone's charity case or laboratory rat. It's not charity, Rhodes countered. It's business. If we can demonstrate increased yield with minimal environmental impact, other farms in the region might adopt similar methods. AgriCorp supplies the equipment and consultation and makes money selling the same setup to my neighbors, James finished. I see how it works. Everyone benefits, Rhodes said simply, including your farm. Sarah watched the exchange with keen interest, noting how Rhodes had framed the offer as a business proposition rather than assistance. He'd learned something about Sullivan pride in the past weeks. I'll think about it, James finally said, which from him was tantamount to agreement. Later that evening, as the AgriCorp team departed and the farm settled into twilight, Sarah found Rhodes sitting on the porch steps, watching Lily play with Ranger in the yard. She handed him a cup of coffee and sat beside him, her nurse's eyes automatically assessing his color and energy. Your father is a remarkable man, Rhodes said after a comfortable silence. Infuriating, but remarkable. Sarah smiled. Sullivan men are notoriously stubborn. It takes a special kind of patience to deal with them. You seem to manage it well. Years of practice, she replied, watching her sons join Lily in throwing a frisbee for an enthusiastic Ranger. And what about you? How are you managing your doctor's orders? Rhodes grimaced. I've delegated 3 major projects and postponed 2 international trips. My board thinks I've lost my mind. And have you? Sarah asked, her directness catching him off guard. He considered the question seriously, gazing at Lily's laughing face. Maybe I found it instead, he answered softly. As fireflies began to emerge in the gathering dusk, illuminating the farmyard with their ephemeral glow, the 2 adults sat in companionable silence, watching the next generation play, a tableau of possibility neither could have imagined just a month before. A peculiar hush fell over the Sullivan farm as May turned to June, bringing with it the first warnings of an unusual season. The newly installed weather monitoring station, part of Rhodes's agricultural modernization package that James had reluctantly accepted, showed concerning patterns. Rainfall had been sporadic, temperatures higher than normal, and the local agricultural extension office had issued alerts about a potential blight affecting crops throughout the county. James stood in his cornfield at dawn, rubbing a yellowing leaf between his calloused fingers, his weathered face furrowed with concern. This wasn't the natural aging of the plant. Something was wrong. The eastern field showed the first signs, small spots on the lower leaves that were spreading with alarming speed. Bacterial leaf streak, came Dr. Vasquez's voice behind him. The AgriCorp scientist had been making weekly visits, a condition of their partnership that James still viewed with ambivalence. It's showing up in 3 counties already. My father lost half his crop to blight in 72. James murmured, more to himself than to her. Nearly lost the farm. We have better solutions now, she assured him, kneeling to examine the plants more closely. But we need to act quickly. Back at the farmhouse, Sarah was preparing breakfast before her hospital shift when Rhodes's sleek car pulled into the driveway. Over the past month, these visits had become routine, ostensibly to check on the AgriCorp improvements, but increasingly just to bring Lily and to engage with the Sullivans. Morning, Rhodes called, entering without knocking, another sign of the evolving relationship between the families. At 65, he moved with the vigor of a younger man, his recent health scare having paradoxically energized rather than diminished him. Today, however, his expression was grave as he held out his tablet. "Have you seen the agricultural bulletin?" Sarah took it, scanning the report with growing concern. "How bad is it?" "Potentially devastating for traditional farming methods," Rhodes answered honestly. "But AgriCorp has developed a specialized treatment that's showing promise in early trials." The screen door banged as James entered, followed by Dr. Vasquez. "We've got trouble," he announced, then stopped short at the sight of Rhodes. "But you already know that, don't you?" "The treatment protocol is expensive," Rhodes admitted. "But effective." James's face hardened. "And how much will this miracle cure cost farmers like me?" "Dad," Sarah cautioned, recognizing the brewing storm. Rhodes met James's gaze steadily. "AgriCorp will provide it at cost to affected farms in this county." "At cost?" James repeated skeptically. "Out of the goodness of your corporate heart." "No," Rhodes replied coolly. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because I'm not interested in watching this community collapse from something preventable." Their standoff was interrupted by Lily's entrance, followed by Ranger, whose aging body still moved with enthusiasm whenever the girl visited. At 10, Lily had blossomed in the weeks since her adventure in the woods. Her previously pale complexion now glowed with health from outdoor play, and her once hesitant demeanor had given way to quiet confidence. "Grandpa, can I show Jason and Michael how Ranger retrieves now?" "We've been practicing," she asked, oblivious to the tension among the adults. Rhodes softened immediately. "Of course, sweetheart. They're outside by the barn." As she raced out, Ranger at her heels, the adults watched in momentary silence, a reminder of what had initially brought them together. "Your specialists can look at my fields," James finally conceded. "But I want to know exactly what's being sprayed on my land." "Full disclosure," Dr. Vasquez promised. "The treatment combines a targeted bactericide with a biological agent that strengthens the plant's natural defenses." Sarah glanced at her watch. "I have to get to the hospital, but keep me updated." She hesitated, then added, "Mr. Rhodes, Alexander, perhaps you could stay for dinner tonight? We should discuss contingency plans if the treatment doesn't work." The casual invitation marked yet another shift in their evolving relationship, from adversaries to reluctant partners to something approaching friendship. That evening, as the specialists treated the affected fields with equipment that would have been financially out of reach for the Sullivans without AgriCorp's intervention, Sarah prepared a simple but hearty meal. The kitchen windows were open to catch the breeze, filling the house with the mingled scents of freshly turned earth, chemical treatments, and Sarah's cooking. "Mom, look what Lily taught Ranger," Jason called from the yard, where the dog was performing an elaborate series of commands, ending with retrieving specific items by name, a trick that had taken weeks of patient training. From her vantage point at the stove, Sarah observed something remarkable. Her sons, initially wary of the wealthy city girl, had accepted Lily as an honorary Sullivan. As an only child raised in isolation, Lily blossomed under their brotherly attention, and Rhodes, watching from the porch with James, looked more at peace than she had ever seen him. "Your granddaughter has a gift with animals," James remarked, sipping his iced tea. "And with stubborn boys, apparently." Rhodes chuckled. "She gets her determination from her mother, my daughter. Catherine would have been proud to see her now." His voice caught slightly. "We lost Catherine and her husband in a car accident when Lily was 5. I wasn't equipped to raise a child alone." James studied his former adversary with new understanding. "Raising kids isn't something any of us is equipped for. We just do our best." "Some better than others," Rhodes admitted. "I delegated the job to employees while I built my empire. Now I'm trying to make up for lost time." As the sunset painted the fields in amber and gold, the unlikely gathering prepared to share a meal together. Two families from different worlds, united by a child's misadventure, a dog's protective instinct, and now a common enemy threatening their shared future. The 4th of July arrived with an unexpected blessing: rain. Not the violent summer thunderstorms that could flatten crops, but a steady, gentle downpour that lasted through the night and into the morning. The Sullivan farm, like the rest of Oakwood Valley, soaked up the moisture with palpable relief. The blight treatment appeared to be working. The spread had slowed significantly, but the additional rainfall boosted everyone's spirits. By mid-morning, the sky cleared to reveal perfect weather for the town's annual Independence Day celebration. For the first time, the Sullivans had invited Rhodes and Lily to join them at the festival, a significant gesture in a close-knit community where outsiders were typically viewed with suspicion. "I'm not wearing that," James protested as Sarah held up the pressed blue button-down shirt she'd laid out for him. "You're not going to the festival in a work shirt with tractor grease on it," she countered firmly. At 43, Sarah had the practiced patience of someone accustomed to managing stubborn patients and an equally stubborn father. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, but she'd applied a touch of makeup for the occasion, something James noticed but wisely didn't mention. "Since when do we dress up for the town picnic?" he grumbled, reluctantly taking the shirt. "Since we invited guests," Sarah replied simply. The Oakwood Valley Independence Day Festival transformed the town square into a Norman Rockwell painting, red, white, and blue bunting draped from lampposts, children running with sparklers as twilight approached, and row upon row of picnic tables laden with potluck dishes from local families. The Sullivans arrived in their weathered pickup truck, bringing Sarah's famous apple pies and the boys' handmade cornhole game. They had barely finished setting up when Rhodes's car pulled in. Not the usual sleek black sedan, but a more modest SUV that didn't scream city money quite as loudly. "I wasn't sure what to bring," Rhodes admitted, holding out a wicker basket. The housekeeper suggested fried chicken, but that seemed presumptuous. Sarah peeked inside to find an assortment of artisanal cheeses and fresh bread. "This is perfect. Thank you." Lily immediately ran to join Michael and Jason, who were setting up the cornhole boards. Ranger, who had come along for the day, trotted beside her protectively. "Your dog's getting lots of attention," Rhodes remarked as several children approached to pet Ranger. "He's earned his place of honor," James acknowledged. "Town's been calling him a hero since the story got out about how he found Lily." The mention of that pivotal day hung between them momentarily, a reminder of how differently things might have turned out. As they joined the community feast, Rhodes found himself the object of curious stares and whispered conversations. His reputation as a corporate titan had preceded him, but the fact that he was sitting with the respected Sullivan family granted him a tentative acceptance. "Alexander, I didn't expect to see you here," called a well-dressed man approaching their table. "Thomas Whitfield, Oakwood Development Corporation. We met at the Philadelphia Economic Summit last year." Rhodes nodded politely, but without warmth. "Mr. Whitfield, I've been trying to reach you about a potential partnership," Whitfield continued, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "My firm represents Global Harvest Enterprises. They're very interested in establishing operations in this region." James's attention sharpened at the mention of Global Harvest, a multinational agribusiness conglomerate known for aggressive land acquisition and industrial farming methods that often pushed small farmers out of business. "We should discuss this privately," Rhodes replied coolly. "This is a community celebration, not a business meeting." Whitfield's gaze swept across the Sullivan family, lingering on Sarah before returning to Rhodes. "Of course, but don't wait too long. Their offer to local landowners expires in 30 days. Life-changing money for some of these quaint family operations." He nodded toward the surrounding farms represented at the festival. "My card, when you're ready to talk." As Whitfield walked away, James fixed Rhodes with a hard stare. "Friend of yours?" "Acquaintance," Rhodes corrected. "One I've been avoiding." "Global Harvest has been sending letters to every farmer in the county," Sarah explained to Rhodes, "offering to buy land at premium prices while hinting that holdouts will eventually be forced to sell anyway." Rhodes's expression darkened. "I'm familiar with their tactics." "And what's AgriCorp's position?" James asked directly. "Competing or collaborating with them?" Before Rhodes could answer, Lily ran up with Ranger, both breathless from play. "Grandpa, they're starting the talent show soon. Can I watch?" The conversation paused as they moved toward the gazebo where local residents of all ages were preparing to showcase everything from fiddle playing to baton twirling. As they settled on a blanket spread over the grass, Rhodes leaned closer to James. "For the record," he said quietly, "AgriCorp has declined multiple partnership proposals from Global Harvest. Their methods are not compatible with my current vision." James studied him skeptically. And what exactly is your current vision, Rhodes? Because a few months ago, you were ready to bulldoze my farm. Rhodes watched Lily laughing with the Sullivan boys, her face illuminated by the holiday lights strung throughout the square. Let's just say my priorities have evolved. The talent show proceeded with the charming earnestness of small-town entertainment. When the local high school band struck up America the Beautiful, Rhodes noticed Sarah singing along softly, her voice surprisingly melodic. Their eyes met briefly, and something unspoken passed between them, a moment of connection that startled them both with its intensity. As fireworks exploded overhead later that evening, painting the sky in brilliant bursts of color, Ranger pressed close to James, unnerved by the noise. The old farmer stroked the dog's head soothingly while observing Rhodes and Lily beside them, the businessman pointing out particularly spectacular displays to his granddaughter, whose face reflected both the pyrotechnics and pure joy. "Never thought I'd see Alexander Rhodes at our little town festival," remarked Eleanor Peterson, Oakwood Valley's longtime mayor, settling beside James. "Times are changing." "Some things don't change," James replied, nodding toward where several farmers were gathered in serious conversation, their expressions concerned. "Global Harvest's making moves." Eleanor sighed. "They've already bought the old Peterson place and the Williams farm, offering cash too tempting for some to refuse." James watched Rhodes, wondering where the businessman's true allegiance lay in this unfolding battle for the soul of their agricultural community, and how the fragile connections forming between their families would weather the coming storm. The 4th of July arrived with an unexpected blessing: rain. Not the violent summer thunderstorms that could flatten crops, but a steady, gentle downpour that lasted through the night and into the morning. The Sullivan farm, like the rest of Oakwood Valley, soaked up the moisture with palpable relief. The blight treatment appeared to be working. The spread had slowed significantly, but the additional rainfall boosted everyone's spirits. By mid-morning, the sky cleared to reveal perfect weather for the town's annual Independence Day celebration. For the first time, the Sullivans had invited Rhodes and Lily to join them at the festival, a significant gesture in a close-knit community where outsiders were typically viewed with suspicion. "I'm not wearing that," James protested as Sarah held up the pressed blue button-down shirt she'd laid out for him. "You're not going to the festival in a work shirt with tractor grease on it," she countered firmly. At 43, Sarah had the practiced patience of someone accustomed to managing stubborn patients and an equally stubborn father. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, but she'd applied a touch of makeup for the occasion, something James noticed but wisely didn't mention. "Since when do we dress up for the town picnic?" he grumbled, reluctantly taking the shirt. "Since we invited guests," Sarah replied simply. The Oakwood Valley Independence Day Festival transformed the town square into a Norman Rockwell painting, red, white, and blue bunting draped from lampposts, children running with sparklers as twilight approached, and row upon row of picnic tables laden with potluck dishes from local families. The Sullivans arrived in their weathered pickup truck, bringing Sarah's famous apple pies and the boys' handmade cornhole game. They had barely finished setting up when Rhodes's car pulled in. Not the usual sleek black sedan, but a more modest SUV that didn't scream city money quite as loudly. "I wasn't sure what to bring," Rhodes admitted, holding out a wicker basket. The housekeeper suggested fried chicken, but that seemed presumptuous. Sarah peeked inside to find an assortment of artisanal cheeses and fresh bread. "This is perfect. Thank you." Lily immediately ran to join Michael and Jason, who were setting up the cornhole boards. Ranger, who had come along for the day, trotted beside her protectively. "Your dog's getting lots of attention," Rhodes remarked as several children approached to pet Ranger. "He's earned his place of honor," James acknowledged. "Town's been calling him a hero since the story got out about how he found Lily." The mention of that pivotal day hung between them momentarily, a reminder of how differently things might have turned out. As they joined the community feast, Rhodes found himself the object of curious stares and whispered conversations. His reputation as a corporate titan had preceded him, but the fact that he was sitting with the respected Sullivan family granted him a tentative acceptance. "Alexander, I didn't expect to see you here," called a well-dressed man approaching their table. "Thomas Whitfield, Oakwood Development Corporation. We met at the Philadelphia Economic Summit last year." Rhodes nodded politely, but without warmth. "Mr. Whitfield, I've been trying to reach you about a potential partnership," Whitfield continued, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. My firm represents Global Harvest Enterprises. They're very interested in establishing operations in this region. James's attention sharpened at the mention of Global Harvest, a multinational agribusiness conglomerate known for aggressive land acquisition and industrial farming methods that often pushed small farmers out of business. We should discuss this privately, Rhodes replied coolly. This is a community celebration, not a business meeting. Whitfield's gaze swept across the Sullivan family, lingering on Sarah before returning to Rhodes. Of course, but don't wait too long. Their offer to local landowners expires in 30 days. Life-changing money for some of these quaint family operations. He nodded toward the surrounding farms represented at the festival. My card, when you're ready to talk. As Whitfield walked away, James fixed Rhodes with a hard stare. Friend of yours? Acquaintance, Rhodes corrected. One I've been avoiding. Global Harvest has been sending letters to every farmer in the county, Sarah explained to Rhodes, offering to buy land at premium prices while hinting that holdouts will eventually be forced to sell anyway. Rhodes's expression darkened. I'm familiar with their tactics. And what's AgriCorp's position? James asked directly. Competing or collaborating with them? Before Rhodes could answer, Lily ran up with Ranger, both breathless from play. Grandpa, they're starting the talent show soon. Can I watch? The conversation paused as they moved toward the gazebo where local residents of all ages were preparing to showcase everything from fiddle playing to baton twirling. As they settled on a blanket spread over the grass, Rhodes leaned closer to James. For the record, he said quietly, AgriCorp has declined multiple partnership proposals from Global Harvest. Their methods are not compatible with my current vision. James studied him skeptically. And what exactly is your current vision, Rhodes? Because a few months ago, you were ready to bulldoze my farm. Rhodes watched Lily laughing with the Sullivan boys, her face illuminated by the holiday lights strung throughout the square. Let's just say my priorities have evolved. The talent show proceeded with the charming earnestness of small-town entertainment. When the local high school band struck up America the Beautiful, Rhodes noticed Sarah singing along softly, her voice surprisingly melodic. Their eyes met briefly, and something unspoken passed between them, a moment of connection that startled them both with its intensity. As fireworks exploded overhead later that evening, painting the sky in brilliant bursts of color, Ranger pressed close to James, unnerved by the noise. The old farmer stroked the dog's head soothingly while observing Rhodes and Lily beside them, the businessman pointing out particularly spectacular displays to his granddaughter, whose face reflected both the pyrotechnics and pure joy. Never thought I'd see Alexander Rhodes at our little town festival, remarked Eleanor Peterson, Oakwood Valley's longtime mayor, settling beside James. Times are changing. Some things don't change, James replied, nodding toward where several farmers were gathered in serious conversation, their expressions concerned. Global Harvest's making moves. Eleanor sighed. They've already bought the old Peterson place and the Williams farm, offering cash too tempting for some to refuse. James watched Rhodes, wondering where the businessman's true allegiance lay in this unfolding battle for the soul of their agricultural community, and how the fragile connections forming between their families would weather the coming storm. The warm glow of July faded into the relentless heat of August, bringing with it a mounting tension throughout Oakwood Valley. Global Harvest representatives had become a common sight, appearing at kitchen tables across the county with contract offers and polished promises. Their headquarters had established a temporary office in town, a sleek, air-conditioned space that contrasted sharply with the weathered storefronts surrounding it. At the Sullivan farm, the modernized irrigation system had proven its worth during the dry spell, preserving their crops while neighboring fields struggled. The blight had been contained, but not without cost. The chemical treatments had strained their already tight budget, despite AgriCorp providing them at reduced rates. Sarah descended the farmhouse stairs at dawn, pausing halfway down at the sound of hushed voices in the kitchen. Her father and Rhodes sat at the table, documents spread between them, their expressions grave in the glow of the early morning light. She remained still, listening. These figures can't be right, James was saying, tapping a paper with his index finger. Global Harvest is offering 30% above market value for every acre, with contracts that allow them to use whatever pesticides and methods they want, Rhodes pointed out. including chemicals banned in Europe and parts of Asia. The fine print gives them unrestricted water rights, too, but 30% above market. James repeated, the temptation evident in his voice despite his skepticism. Would barely cover your medical expenses if their contaminants leach into your well, Rhodes countered. I've seen their operations in the Midwest. 3 years after they move in, the surrounding communities face increased rates of respiratory issues, groundwater contamination. Sarah stepped fully into the kitchen, causing both men to look up. What medical expenses? She demanded, her gaze fixed on her father. James shot Rhodes an accusatory look. Nothing to worry about. Just a checkup. Dad. Sarah's tone made it clear she wouldn't accept evasion. Rhodes rose, gathering the documents. I should go. Lily has a riding lesson this morning. Stay, Sarah commanded, her nurse's authority stopping him mid-motion. What's wrong with my father? James sighed heavily, the weight of unspoken burdens evident in the slump of his shoulders. Dr. Miller found some irregularities in my heart rhythm. Wants me to see a specialist in Philadelphia. When were you planning to tell me? Sarah asked, her voice carefully controlled though her hands trembled slightly. When there was something worth telling, James replied stubbornly. Could be nothing. Or it could be serious, Sarah countered. The specialist? Cardiologist at Penn Medicine, Rhodes supplied. Dr. Abrams. Best in the state. Sarah's gaze shifted from her father to Rhodes. You arranged this? Rhodes had the grace to look uncomfortable. I made some calls. That's all. The kitchen door swung open as Michael and Jason entered, sweaty from early chores. They sensed the tension immediately, exchanging glances as they moved cautiously to the refrigerator. Boys, finish up outside, Sarah directed. And tell Ranger his breakfast will be late. Once they'd left, Sarah filled 3 coffee mugs with mechanical precision. Now, tell me everything. An hour later, Rhodes drove away from the Sullivan farm, his mind troubled by the conversation. Sarah's reaction to her father's health concerns had been a complex mixture of professional calm and personal fear, a combination that had affected Rhodes more deeply than he cared to admit. His cell phone rang through the car speakers. Rhodes, he answered crisply. Mr. Rhodes, it's Thomas Whitfield. We need to talk. Global Harvest Board is meeting today to approve a significant escalation of their acquisition strategy in Oakwood Valley. Rhodes's grip tightened on the steering wheel. What kind of escalation? The kind that makes your efforts to protect the Sullivan farm irrelevant. I think you'd want to be ahead of this. At his country estate, Rhodes found Lily in the stable with her riding instructor. 7 months ago, he might have waved briefly before retreating to his home office. Today, he took the time to watch her practice, noting her improved posture and confidence. Grandpa, look, she called, guiding her pony through a simple pattern of poles. I'm learning dressage. Magnificent, he called back with genuine pride. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Dad's appointment scheduled for next Tuesday. He's arguing about who will handle farm operations while he's gone. Rhodes typed back, I'll have one of our agricultural managers available if needed. The response came quickly. He'll never accept that. But maybe Lily could bring Ranger over? Dad listens better when the dog is around. Rhodes smiled despite his concerns. The simple observation captured something essential about James Sullivan. Beneath the stubborn exterior was a man capable of deep connection, who showed his truest self through his relationship with animals and land. Later that morning, Rhodes arrived at Whitfield's office in town, noting the conspicuous Global Harvest logo newly installed above the door. Inside, the corporate aesthetic felt jarringly out of place in the small-town setting. Alexander, glad you could make it. Whitfield greeted him with artificial warmth. Coffee. What's their play? Rhodes asked directly, ignoring the offer. Whitfield's smile tightened. Global Harvest has acquired the water rights to Clearwater Creek. The statement hit Rhodes like a physical blow. Clearwater Creek was the primary water source for half the farms in the valley, including the Sullivan property. That's impossible. Water rights are tied to the adjacent land parcels. They purchased the Miller property last week, Whitfield explained smugly. And the old regulations had a loophole. The company that controls the headwaters can effectively control flow rates downstream. That's extortion, Rhodes stated flatly. That's business, Whitfield corrected. Something you used to understand before you started playing farmer with the Sullivans. Global Harvest is prepared to offer you a partnership stake if AgriCorp stops interfering with their expansion. Rhodes studied the man before him. The tailored suit, the calculated smile, the cold ambition. 6 months ago, he might have seen a kindred spirit. Now, he saw only a threat to everything that had unexpectedly become important to him. "Tell your clients I'm not interested," Rhodes replied, rising to leave. "And you might want to check Global Harvest's legal position more carefully." Pennsylvania's water rights laws were updated last year after the Westbrook case. It was a bluff. Rhodes wasn't aware of any such updates. But the momentary uncertainty in Whitfield's expression told him the man would waste valuable time investigating. Back in his car, Rhodes made a call he'd been avoiding for weeks. "Margaret? It's Alex Rhodes. I need the board assembled for an emergency session. And get our legal team to pull every document related to water rights in Chester County. We're going to war." Sarah Sullivan's heart sank as she read the notice posted at the entrance to her family's property. Water Usage Restriction Enforcement Notice, Clearwater Creek Basin Authority. The official-looking document detailed severe limitations on irrigation access, effective immediately, with prohibitive fees for exceeding the new quotas. "They can't do this," Michael insisted, reading over her shoulder. At 16, his face still held boyish features, but his eyes showed a maturity born from growing up working the land. "Can they? Legally? I don't know," Sarah replied, carefully removing the notice. "Morally? Absolutely not." Inside the farmhouse, James sat at the kitchen table with Jason, reviewing the latest soil test results. At 17, Jason had his grandfather's analytical mind and was the more studious of the twins. They looked up as Sarah entered with the notice. "Global Harvest," James growled after reading it. "They're trying to choke us out." "Dad, we need to talk about Tuesday's appointment," Sarah said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "The water rights issue doesn't change the fact that you need to see that specialist." James brushed her concern away with a wave. "Who has time for doctors when our livelihood is under attack?" The kitchen door opened as Ranger announced new arrivals with a single bark. Lily entered first, her blonde hair in neat braids, followed by Rhodes, whose customary business attire had been replaced by khakis and a polo shirt, his new standard for farm visits. "You've seen the notice," Rhodes observed, noting the paper on the table. "Your friends at Global Harvest move fast," James remarked bitterly. Rhodes's jaw tightened. "They're not my friends. And I've spent the last 48 hours with AgriCorp's legal team preparing our response." Sarah studied him, her medical training making her observant of the new lines of fatigue around his eyes. "What kind of response?" "A temporary injunction, for starters," Rhodes explained, accepting the coffee Sarah automatically offered. "Global Harvest is exploiting a regulatory gap, but their interpretation won't hold up in court. The problem is they know legal battles take time most farmers don't have in the middle of growing season. So they starve us out while lawyers argue," James concluded bluntly. Lily had settled on the floor with Ranger, seemingly absorbed in petting the dog, but her voice surprised the adults. "That's why they're building the pipes, isn't it? The big trucks I saw from my riding lesson yesterday." Rhodes knelt beside his granddaughter. "What trucks, Lily?" "On the old Miller property. They're putting in huge pipes where the creek starts." Rhodes and James exchanged alarmed glances. "They're diverting the water," Rhodes realized, "creating facts on the ground before any legal challenge can stop them." "We need to see this for ourselves," James insisted, already reaching for his hat. An hour later, James's pickup truck stopped at the ridge overlooking what had once been Miller's pastureland. Below them, heavy equipment carved trenches alongside Clearwater Creek's headwaters, while workers installed massive black pipes designed to redirect the flow. "They're working through the weekend to get this done," Sarah observed grimly. Rhodes made a series of terse phone calls, his expression darkening with each conversation. The county inspector won't be available until Monday, and Global Harvest obtained emergency permits claiming agricultural necessity. "By Monday, the damage will be done," James said, his voice hollow with the weight of generational loss. "4 generations of Sullivans, and I'll be the one who loses it all." Rhodes studied the proud farmer beside him, a man who'd initially been his adversary, then a reluctant partner, and now someone whose respect he valued more than he'd ever anticipated. "We're not beaten yet." Back at the Sullivan farm, an impromptu war council gathered around the kitchen table. Michael and Jason had called friends from neighboring farms, while Sarah contacted colleagues from the hospital whose families owned land affected by the water restrictions. Rhodes had summoned Dr. Vasquez, an AgriCorp's regional manager. "We need evidence that this diversion will cause environmental damage," Rhodes explained, his corporate strategist mind fully engaged. "That's the fastest way to get a stop work order." "The watershed supports 3 endangered species," offered one of the neighbors, a retired biology teacher. "But proving immediate harm requires documentation." "I might know someone who can help," Sarah said suddenly. "Ethan Parker from the hospital board. He runs the environmental engineering department at Penn State's satellite campus. They have water quality monitoring equipment." As plans took shape, Lily sat beside her grandfather, uncharacteristically quiet until she tugged at his sleeve. "The farmers could share water, couldn't they? Like we learned about in school, water banking?" Rhodes stared at his granddaughter with dawning realization. "Lily, you're brilliant," he declared, turning to the group. "We create our own water management collective. Every landowner in the watershed pools their individual water rights under a conservation covenant. It supersedes Global Harvest's claim to the Miller Properties allocation." "They still control the headwaters," James pointed out. "Physically, yes," Rhodes acknowledged. "But not legally. Not if we can prove their diversion harms protected species and violates the collective rights of downstream users." "You're suggesting we fight a multinational corporation with a conservation agreement and some water samples?" Sarah asked skeptically. "No," Rhodes replied, a familiar gleam of competitive determination in his eyes. "I'm suggesting we fight them with everything we've got. Legal challenges, public pressure, scientific evidence, and most importantly, a unified community." "Alexander," James said carefully, "why are you doing this? 6 months ago, you were ready to take my land. Now you're organizing farmers against the same kind of corporate interests you represent." The room fell silent as everyone awaited Rhodes's answer. He looked at Lily, happily scratching Ranger behind the ears, then at the Sullivan family, people who had become unexpectedly important to him. "Because I was wrong," he admitted simply, "and because some things matter more than business." Later that evening, as most of the group dispersed to begin implementing their plans, Sarah found Rhodes alone on the porch, staring across the darkening fields. "That specialist appointment for my father," she began without preamble. "How difficult was it to arrange?" "Dr. Abrams doesn't usually take new patients," Rhodes answered carefully. "But we have history." Sarah leaned against the porch railing. "And you didn't mention it because your father is a proud man. He wouldn't have accepted help if he knew I'd pulled strings." She studied him in the fading light. "You've changed, Alexander." "Have I?" he asked, genuinely uncertain. The man who showed up with bulldozers would never have organized a community water conservation collective, she replied with a small smile. Or spent his weekend fighting for a farm he once tried to take. Inside the house, they could hear Lily's laughter mingling with Jason's voice as they played a board game, while Ranger's tail thumped contentedly against the floor. The sound represented everything that had unexpectedly transformed Rhodes's carefully ordered existence into something messy, but infinitely more meaningful. "For what it's worth," Sarah added softly, her hand briefly touching his, "I think it's a change for the better." The late September air carried the first hint of autumn as the Sullivan farm prepared for the annual harvest festival. What had once been a simple community gathering had transformed into something more symbolic this year, a celebration of victory against seemingly insurmountable odds. 3 weeks earlier, the coalition of farmers, armed with environmental impact data collected by Sarah's hospital colleague and legal documentation prepared by AgriCorp's attorneys, had secured an emergency injunction against Global Harvest's water diversion project. Rhodes had testified before the county commissioners, leveraging his business reputation in an unexpected direction, against corporate overreach rather than for it. The Water Collective, inspired by Lily's innocent suggestion, had been formalized into the Clearwater Conservation Trust, with James Sullivan and Alexander Rhodes serving as unlikely co-chairs. Global Harvest had retreated for now, though everyone understood the battle wasn't permanently won. On this golden afternoon, the Sullivan farmhouse bustled with activity. Colorful bunting hung from the porch railings, trestle tables dotted the yard, and the aroma of Sarah's apple pies wafted through open windows. The Harvest Festival had moved from the town square to the Sullivan property this year, a deliberate statement about the community's priorities. In the kitchen, James Sullivan stood before the mirror in the hallway, struggling with his tie, a concession to the ceremony planned for later. "Need help with that?" Rhodes asked, entering through the back door without knocking, a habit that now seemed natural to both men. "Damn thing," James muttered. "Haven't worn a tie since Martha's funeral." Rhodes stepped forward, his fingers deftly adjusting the knot. "I've had more practice," he said with a wry smile. "Corporate uniform." James submitted to the assistants with minimal grumbling. "How'd the appointment go?" he asked, referring to his follow-up visit with Dr. Abrams the previous day. "Sarah didn't tell you?" "Sarah believes in patient confidentiality," James replied, "even with her father." Rhodes finished with the tie and stepped back. "The arrhythmia is responding to medication. Dr. Abrams was pleased with your progress, though he mentioned something about a stubborn patient not following diet restrictions." James snorted. "Man tries to take away my coffee after taking away half my farm workload. There are limits." Outside, Rangers supervised the festival preparations from his favorite spot under the oak tree, his aging body still dignified despite the gray now predominant around his muzzle. At his side sat Lily, reading aloud from a book, while periodically glancing up to watch Michael and Jason hang lights around the barn. Sarah emerged from the house carrying another pie, her hair loose around her shoulders and wearing a floral dress instead of her usual practical attire. She paused when she saw Rhodes with her father, a complex emotion crossing her features before she composed herself. "The mayor just called," she announced. "They're bringing the plaque for the ceremony at 5. "Plaque," James grumbled. "Fuss over nothing." "It's not nothing," Rhodes countered. "The Clearwater Conservation Trust is a model other communities are already looking to replicate. Your leadership made that possible." "Our leadership," James corrected, the admission clearly still requiring effort. Though it was really Ranger who started it all. "And Lily," as if hearing his name, the German shepherd raised his head, ears perked attentively before returning to his peaceful dozing beside the girl. By late afternoon, the farm had filled with neighbors, friends, and even some former adversaries now united by common cause. The festival atmosphere hummed with music from a local bluegrass band, children's laughter, and the contented murmur of community solidarity. "Mr. Rhodes?" Sarah approached where Alexander stood observing the gathering. "There's something I need to show you." She led him away from the crowd toward the farmhouse office, a small room that had once been a pantry, converted to hold the farm's minimal administrative paperwork. From a drawer, she withdrew a folder. "I found this last week when we were organizing the trust documents," she said, handing it to him with an unreadable expression. Rhodes opened it to find property deeds, not just for the Sullivan farm, but for 5 neighboring properties, all held in a trust controlled by AgriCorp. "You've been buying land," Sarah stated flatly. "All this time, while fighting global harvest, you've been quietly acquiring property through shell companies." Rhodes met her gaze, recognizing the hurt and betrayal in her eyes. "Sarah, was it all a lie?" she demanded, keeping her voice low though emotion made it tremble. "The help with Dad's health, the community water trust, standing up to global harvest. Was it just a more sophisticated strategy to get what you originally came for?" He placed the folder on the desk between them. "When did you find this? Does it matter? Were you planning to tell us before or after you controlled half the valley?" "I was planning to tell you today," Rhodes replied quietly. "After the ceremony." Sarah's laugh held no humor. "How convenient. Look at the dates on those deeds, Sarah," he said. "And look at the terms." She hesitated before reopening the folder, scanning the documents with growing confusion. These transfers were all completed within the last month. And they're leaseback agreements. "I bought the properties from farmers who were selling to Global Harvest anyway," Rhodes explained. "But instead of taking their land, AgriCorp is leasing it back to them at nominal rates with sustainable farming covenants. They get to keep working their land while receiving the capital they needed." Sarah looked up, uncertainty replacing anger. "Why?" "Because some of these families have farmed here for generations, just like yours. Because industrial agriculture would destroy this community. Because," he hesitated, "uncharacteristically vulnerable. Because somewhere along the way, I started caring about more than quarterly profits." Before Sarah could respond, the office door opened as Lily peeked in. "Grandpa, they're looking for you and Mr. Sullivan for the ceremony." The trust dedication proceeded beneath the oak tree, with Mayor Peterson presenting a commemorative plaque honoring the community's unified stand against corporate water appropriation. James and Rhodes stood side by side, the farmer still uncomfortable with public recognition, the businessman surprisingly humble. And special recognition must go to Ranger, the mayor concluded, gesturing to the German shepherd who sat attentively at James's feet, whose heroism in finding young Lily Rhodes last autumn began the partnership that ultimately saved our watershed. As applause surrounded them, Sarah watched the two men, her father, weathered and proud, and Alexander Rhodes, transformed from adversary to ally to something more complex she wasn't yet ready to name. Between them stood Lily, her hand resting on Ranger's head, bridging worlds that once seemed irreconcilable. Later, as twilight softened the edges of the day and festival lanterns cast warm pools of light across the farm, Rhodes found Sarah alone by the edge of the eastern field, the one that had first shown signs of blight months earlier, now healthy and ready for harvest. "I should have told you about the land purchases," he acknowledged without preamble. "Yes, you should have," she agreed, arms crossed protectively. "I'm not used to consulting or explaining myself." Sarah turned to face him directly. "That may work in corporate boardrooms, Alexander, but not in relationships that matter." The word relationships hung between them, laden with unspoken questions. "I'm learning," he offered simply. From the festival area came the sound of laughter as James demonstrated an old-fashioned square dance to delighted children, Rangers circling the group with tail wagging. Lily had joined Michael and Jason at the dessert table, belonging among them as naturally as if she'd always been part of their world. "It's strange," Sarah mused, following Rhodes's gaze. "A year ago, we were strangers. Now, she smiled faintly. Now we're something else entirely." As they walked back toward the celebration, Rhodes offered her his arm, a gesture both formal and intimate. To his surprise, she accepted it, her fingers warm against his sleeve. "The trust still faces challenges," he remarked. "Global harvest won't give up easily." "No," Sarah agreed. "But neither will we." Under the harvest moon, with autumn's chill promising change while the land prepared for its seasonal rest, two families continued their unexpected journey toward connection, all because one dog had chosen to protect rather than attack on a fateful morning nearly a year before. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and if you've watched this far, comment "I watched this far" and share your opinion about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the end screen. It's very exciting.